Okay, guys, sorry for the awkward break there in the last video. I did not realize that I had a limit on how long I could record. So anyway, we were looking at what active readers do, and we're on number 5 now. So asking questions, this is just as you're reading, making sure that you are asking yourself and writing down questions to ask me or your classmates, whether it's a word you don't know, whether it's something that you don't understand that's happening, if it's a reference to something that you don't understand, especially, we have a lot of allusions in a lot of our literature. And if we don't understand the reference, we don't understand the allusion at all. So whatever it is, make sure that you are making note of those questions. And we'll talk a little bit about that with annotation. And be ready to bring them to class or to look them up on your own. But asking yourself questions as you read is a good idea. And the last one, just rereading. Okay, especially if you read a section and at the end of it, you're like, whoa, I have no idea what I just read. Definitely go back and reread. Obviously, for novels, it's hard to reread the whole thing. But if there's, a part that you feel is particularly important, that's a good time to reread. So when it comes to annotation, which is our next part here, we're talking about marking up our text, okay, making notes as we read. Now, for you guys who are at home, this is something I'm going to have to ask you to do kind of on paper right now, along with a digital copy of the story that we're reading. It's not as easy as doing it right on the text, but it's not impossible. And with annotating, there's really not one right way to do it. This is something that, again, is very personal and unique to you as a reader. And it needs to be something that works for you, because if you try to do it the way someone else does it, it's just going to feel like a task and it's not going to end up being helpful for you. So make sure that you are doing it in a way that helps you. Some people like to use highlighters and make it all kinds of different colors. Some people like to use colorful pens. Some people like to underline or circle things. Some people just like to write notes. Some people draw, whatever it might be. So whatever works for you. But here are some good things to do and to include in your annotations. So questions. We just talked about this. So what are you confused about? What are things that you don't understand? Write them down. Write on the text if you've got it, or if you've got your notebook, write them down as you come across them. Personal responses. So remember, on the active reading, we talked about making connections. When you make those connections, write them down. Okay, again, it's going to help you remember this text later if you do that. Pictures and symbols. If you're more artistically inclined, this is a good idea. It doesn't have to be for everybody. I would never write or draw pictures on my annotations because they wouldn't look like anything good. So if you like that, do it. If you don't feel like it's going to help, that's fine. Some people have certain symbols they use and they kind of have a key in their head of what those symbols mean. If you want to do that, that's fine. If you read something that you think is particularly important, make a note of it. Okay, circle it and say, hey, I think this is important. I need to remember to bring this up later. And then summary. So this one is at the end of, let's say you're reading a novel, at the end of each chapter, write a little 3 to 4 sentence summary. If you're reading a short story, maybe it's at the end of each page that you write a little summary. But if you just go through and think, okay, what was the big idea of that section, that'll help you remember it later on. So on this next page, there's some tips and tricks for annotating. If you are highlighting, don't highlight too much. You don't want just big giant chunks of color because it's going to be harder to focus on what was actually important within that section, because it's unlikely that it's a huge chunk like that. Make sure that you think about your purpose for reading. So this is going back to reading for understanding, reading for interpretation, or reading for style. Okay, understand what your purpose is. If you want to use highlighters, you might use a different color for each purpose. So when I do this, I don't always use the same color for each thing, but for the short story that you guys are going to read tonight, I used purple to highlight words that I thought were unfamiliar. I used yellow to highlight sections that I thought were very important. And I used pink to highlight questions that I had. Okay, it's just something simple like that. But again, you don't have to use color at all, so that may not apply to you. Like I said, consider using symbols. I use a lot of arrows whenever I am writing or annotating to point to certain sections where I've taken notes. And then make sure that you comment on every mark that you make. If you highlight, underline, circle it, write your comment. If you don't, you're going to forget why you circled that in the first place. Okay? Make sure that you read through this example here before you move on to your story today.